I'm John Travis, known as Jack, here in Mullumbimby, New South Wales, on December 24th, Christmas Eve in the year 2020, talking to Brian Stenzler in San Diego, who I've just gotten to know, but who is clearly the second generation of wellness pioneers picking up the mantle and carrying it bravely into the wilderness. And I love what you've been doing, the little I know about it, the book you're writing, and I want to, for our viewers, find out what makes you tick, who you are and why, and we'll get into what you've done along the way. But so let's start with where you were born, parents, influences, siblings, early schooling, trauma or non, and childhood, all that stuff. I think our gifts come out of our wounds, so it's always interesting to see what the wounds are. Take, take it away, Brian.
That is true. Thank you, Jack, so much for having me. It truly is an honor and a privilege. And I'll tell you, to have this conversation with you is just amazing because I found you by accident while I was doing research for my book. So to be doing this right now with you and to have this new friendship that we have, I truly, it's an honor and a privilege. And I don't say that lightly. I truly mean that. So thank you. Yeah, so I'm from New York. You probably could hear that in the accent. Born and raised, grew up in, I was born in Manhattan, grew up on Long Island. And three brothers and a sister, and pretty normal family. Parents divorced, stepmom, all that good stuff. Pretty
What what
healthy.
what birth order are you? Where are you in
I'm
the
the
line?
second oldest. I have an older brother.
Uh-huh.
Then we're all 2 years apart. So older brother, then myself, then my stepsister, then brother 2 years younger, and another brother 2 years younger. So we're all 2 years apart. So I'm second to the top.
How old were you when your parents split?
The first time, I think gosh, I don't remember. I want to say 9 or 10. And then they tried to get back together. And I think they split again finally when I was around 12 or 13. I don't
Hmm.
remember, but I remember being very excited about it because the fighting in the house was not fun. Not physical fighting, but the arguing
Yeah,
was very
yeah.
difficult to grow up around. So
What sort of work did they do, or if
yeah,
you can?
so my mom, she was not working at the time. She was just basically raising us. And my dad was a bond broker in Wall Street.
Mm,
So worked for some of the big companies out there in Manhattan. Worked in the World Trade Center, in fact, for many years, but was not there during 9/11. Thank God. Would have wiped
hmm.
out my entire family because I have brothers and sister in finance and everything else. So but yeah, so my dad was in the trading, brokering business and stuff. I never got involved with it. I saw the stress that it caused him in his
Mm.
life, the lifestyle. I remember him having a heart attack at 32, 33 years old.
Whoa.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, he's had his challenges. My dad's like a cat with, 9 lives. It's unbelievable. He's still around in his mid 70s and doing great. But yeah, he's had some pretty near misses, did the smoking, the drinking, and all that other stuff. And
Mm.
whatever other partying goes with the Wall Street world. I guess we could use our imagination. I have nothing. He's never confirmed or denied any of it. I don't ask any questions. We'll leave it at that. Yeah.
And your mom?
My mom, she raised us. She wasn't working. Now she's a paralegal or legal secretary,
Uh-huh.
but she wasn't working at the time when they were married. She didn't start working, I guess, until after they were divorced. So
Hmm.
not really a big career thing for her, just more legal secretary.
And then you had a stepfather or stepmother, or what? Where did
Yeah,
you
so I,
move?
I have a stepmother. She's wonderful. My dad married her when I was a teenager in high school.
Hmm.
That's when my sister came into the family, and she's great, great family. Then I went to college, and when I was going to college in upstate New York in Oneonta, I thought I was going to be a movie producer. That was what
Oh.
I always wanted to do. And actually, it's a very long story. I don't know. We only have like 4 or 5 hours, so probably won't get into that deep one. Just kidding for you listeners. It'll be an hour or so. But I always wanted to be a movie producer, move out to California, make some movies and what have you. That didn't happen during certain circumstances. And so I ended up going to a state school in New York and really there wasn't a film program. So I was doing theater and I realized pretty quickly that wasn't it. I found myself spending a lot of time in the gym, working out, being involved with my fraternity, showing them how to exercise. Exercise and fitness was always a big part of my life. I
Hmm.
wrestled in high school, did martial arts, never got caught up in the drugs pushed or prescribed, never really drank alcohol as a kid. So fitness was a big part of my life. And so somebody had introduced physical therapy to me, and I learned a little bit about it. I'm like, oh, this could be very interesting. So I decided to change all my classes from theater to pre-med for physical therapy. I was going to go to school in Syracuse, and so switched all my classes. And then my mom started dating a guy named Nat Lindner. And when I met Nat for the first time, he asked me, did you ever think about being a chiropractor? I'm like, chiropractor? I'm like, what is that? I'm like, I just thought they were like fake doctors or something like that. I knew nothing about them, crack people's backs or something. I couldn't even pronounce the word. And he started to tell me a little bit about it. He's like, I don't know much about it, but my son Steve just started at chiropractic school in Atlanta at Life University. It was then Life College. You should talk to Steve. You seem to have a lot in common with him. I'm like, sure, I'll talk to Steve. And so I started having a conversation with Steve, and he started talking about the vitalistic principles in healthcare and everything else. And I'm like, wow, I'm like, that really resonates with me. The body is created perfectly. We're not born with too many organs and too few drugs in our bodies. We could bring out this innate intelligence. What? I'm like, this was like so right up my alley. And so my mom and Nat engaged to marry. And I was going to meet Steve for the first time at the wedding. And so Steve had lined up all these chiropractic offices that he was going to take me to during his break, and it was my break. So we're going to go around, visit chiropractic offices, and just see if it was a good fit for me, even though I was already feeling that this was the right thing. So a day and a half before the wedding, Nat, my mom's fiance, drops dead of a heart attack.
Oh.
And you talk about growth through wounds. I was like already on this path, but still exploring it. And so Nat didn't think that he had anything wrong with him. He was a retired NYPD officer, New York Police Department. Thought he was pretty healthy of a guy. Didn't have any symptoms when he woke up in the morning. Didn't have any medications he was taking. Didn't have anything that bothered him. So he thought he was healthy, like most people do. They think you're healthy if you don't have any symptoms. And so he was telling my mom that he wasn't feeling so well when they were going out. And they go to the hospital. And by the time he was on the gurney, he was gone. I actually think it was an aneurysm. It was his first sign of heart disease was death. And that's all too common. And so Steve and I meet for the first time in his dad's funeral. And Steve still thought it was really important to introduce me to the chiropractic world. Took me around to all these offices. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, he's mourning his dad's death, and yet he still felt compelled to introduce me to this profession. And that week is when I became a chiropractor. There was not even a doubt in my mind. And
where was this, where all the offices were? In
this was in New York. So this was between Long Island, Manhattan, and Brooklyn. Met a guy named Pasquale Sarasoli, chiropractor in Brooklyn, New York, who had this group meeting called Self Center, CELL-F Center. Guy was really tuned in. You would have liked him. He passed a bunch of years ago at 100 years young. And such a fascinating man. He was actually born on 9/11/1911. So
wow,
9/11/1911. And from his home in Brooklyn, he was watching the World Trade Towers, the World Trade Center be built, and he just had a bad feeling. He always told us about it, like that. He was like always had a bad feeling about that set of buildings. So,
really
interesting. He was very tuned in, very tuned in.
Now you went to live with your dad's family when he remarried. All of you, or just you and some of your brothers?
So we had they had joint custody. So I went back and forth between my mom and my dad. And then in my last 2 years of high school, I moved in with my dad full time for the most part. And I would go to my mom's here and there. It was just a better fit for me and my lifestyle at the time. But I'm very close with both of my parents still today, and my stepmom. They've been great influences in my life. And, they had their tough times, together, but they've always been good parents. I may parent a little differently than them. We have different values, different beliefs, but they respect my choices, even though they're concerned by some of them. But they respect them and, do our thing.
So what was school like for you? Are you a jock, a nerd, a big man on campus?
Yeah. So to the contrary, growing up, I was a bit of a space cadet, not the most athletic guy in the world. I was more into music. The closest I ever got to being on the football field was playing the trumpet and the baritone in band. I was actually very influenced by Arnold Schwarzenegger. I was very small. I'm still very short. I'm only 5'4", barely. And I was very short, very skinny. And I started reading some of Arnold Schwarzenegger's stuff. And it was like right after the Conan Barbarian movies, before Arnold Schwarzenegger was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Nobody knew who he was. We're talking back
Really?
in, yeah, we're talking like 1985-ish. Maybe the Terminator was out at that point. I think in maybe 84, but he just really wasn't very well known. But I started reading his stuff and started exercising. My uncle, my great uncle at the time, taught me about how to curl weights. And I was probably 15 years old. And I had these little 5-pound weights called heavy hands. And my uncle was like, just do 100 reps a day. And so I would do that. I started doing 100 reps a day and I started to develop a bicep muscle. I'm like, whoa, what is this thing? And so then, reading all this Arnold Schwarzenegger stuff, I decided to join a gym at 16 with some of my friends and started to develop a physique. Changed me completely. And then I started to wrestle in high school and, just come into my own. Then I started playing sports when I was older because once I got into college, they didn't know what how bad of an athlete I was in high school. You get branded a certain way as a kid because you grow up with all
Yeah.
people. Oh, don't pick Stenzler on your team. You don't want this guy. Not only is he short, but he's not coordinated and he doesn't know the game. So I had a brand new start in college. So I got to play, our fraternity football games and other sports like that. So I really didn't start doing sports until later on. But fitness and martial arts was a big part of that for me.
And a big aspect of self-esteem and
Big, huge,
yeah,
huge.
self-image.
I really needed to grow into myself with that. And, fortunately for me, it started when I was like 16 or 17. Some people never realize, that with low self-esteem and everything else, what they're missing out on in life.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely has given me a lot of confidence and a lot of certainty, even still being shorter than everybody else. I don't think it's so much of a Napoleon complex, like some people may joke about, but it's more about, I just walk around with a lot of certainty and people listen. So it helps be an effective leader, which is what I've gotten to do in my profession quite a bit. So.
Interesting. My college roommate and best buddy was 5'4", and I'm 6'5", and we joked about it all the time. But of course, it was assumed I would play basketball in high school, and I hated it. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't coordinated. I wasn't aggressive enough to get the rebounds. I sat on the bench, and the coach wouldn't cut me because my dad was on the school board, and he was afraid for his job. So it was a miserable thing. Of I should like to.
Right.
So I can really relate to that. And I later came to like Mr. Duffy and what's his name? Wrote Ulysses. Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. Okay. James Joyce, one of his lines that I relate to. So, yeah. And any other, before you got to college, you had an older brother and a younger brother, and then
2 younger brothers and my sister just below me.
Yeah. Sister. Mm-hmm. Okay, but then another sister came along when your dad.
No, I refer to my stepsister as my sister.
Oh, okay.
She's been in my family for so long. Yeah.
She's a lot younger than
2 years.
Right?
2 years younger.
Oh, I thought. Huh. Oh, they didn't conceive her. She came.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Now it makes sense. Yeah.
Yes.
I thought I had thought they had created her. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Now, how was college for you? You've got this new sense of self-esteem. You've switched your major. You're climbing to be a chiropractor. How did it finish up?
It was quite different, that's for sure. When I told a lot of my friends in my fraternity that I was going to go to chiropractic school, the reaction was, really? Like that. And, a couple of them be like, oh, why don't you go be a real doctor and stuff like that. I mean, we're talking about back in 92 now. That's when this was. This is 92, and it wasn't, it was accepted, but not as accepted as it is today. Mm-hmm. And they're like, you're pretty smart, and that's like kind of what my brother said too. You're a smart guy. You could probably get into medical school or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, I just want to help people, live a life of abundance from above, down, inside out. And they're just like, what kind of cult what are you drinking? What's the Kool-Aid? But they always knew I was different because even when I was in high school and all my friends were out partying and they were drinking and trying cigarettes and trying, pot and everything else, I never did any of that stuff. I barely had any drinks when I was in high school, never smoked pot even to this day in my life. Not that I judge it, people do what they want to do, just be safe, be careful and stuff. But I was just never into that. I had a natural high in life. So all my friends that I told I was going to be a chiropractor, they didn't know much about chiropractic, but they probably weren't too shocked knowing me. And fortunately, at this point, I could beat up most of them, so they didn't really give me too much of a hard time. But it was good, and it's tough, sometimes going against the grain. And being a chiropractor back then, was going against the grain. So it's definitely in the minority of healthcare professions.
So then, what school did you go to?
I ended up going to Life in Atlanta, Marietta, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And living with Steve for 2 years, the guy who was almost my stepbrother, was my roommate for 2 years till he graduated. So that was pretty neat. And he and I are still best of friends. So that's kind of cool. And, I was there when Sid Williams, anybody that knows the chiropractic profession has probably heard of Sid Williams. He started Life. Yeah. So he started Life when I was there. And great.
I've heard good things about Life from, I'm trying to remember who I know that went there, but yeah, it's unusually well thought of. And one in LA, I think this, if I could remember who it was, went there, but yeah. And now the woman in your life whose picture is behind you there with your son pre-emergence, when did you meet her? Is this, have we gotten to that step yet, or
we could go there? We can go there.
Let's take them in order. Like when let's do chiropractic school first. How was school?
School was great. I enjoyed chiropractic school. I mean, not the academic stuff so much, but I loved the extracurricular, the seminars, the speakers, all of that. I loved it. I was just so delved into the philosophy of chiropractic, the vitalistic principles of what we were doing, that I really enjoyed it. Clinic, was one of the hardest things for a lot of chiropractic students, because you had to adjust 250 people over a period of, I guess, a year and a half or something. And a lot of people didn't finish on time. I finished my clinic rounds of 250 adjustments in a quarter and a half. So in 4.5 months, I finished it and kept going. And half of that, I had a broken wrist from playing football. So, so I started late and still got it done early. I was a personal trainer. I paid my way through chiropractic school, basically, besides student loans, as a personal trainer. And so I wouldn't train anybody unless they were seeing a chiropractor. So maybe they came to me and saw me in clinic, or before I was in clinic, they would see another chiropractor. So I was just ready to go. So I had a great chiropractic school experience. Not everybody does, but I was very blessed, very fortunate, and I had the right attitude towards it. So.
And you graduated when, in 90?
So I graduated March 98.
98. Okay.
March 98. I practiced. I did a very short stint practicing in Woodstock, Georgia, while I was waiting for my New York license. And got my New York license, opened up an office in Long Island in a town called Great Neck, which I did that originally as a joke because I thought it'd be funny for a chiropractor to be in a place called Great Neck. So,
I didn't get it.
Got it now?
Yeah, I got it as soon as you said that.
Yeah. And I called it Great Neck Better Health Chiropractic. And because I explained, if you have a great neck, you'll have better health. That was just one of the, I like puns. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I always had this this idea of opening up wellness centers, and I used the acronym of DREAM, of living a wellness lifestyle. And really, the whole idea of the DREAM concept really started when I was in chiropractic school, and even a little bit before that with Steve and his dad. When we talk about somebody who drops dead of heart disease, not knowing they had heart disease, thinking that they were healthy, we knew that there was something wrong.
Yeah.
And so when you ask somebody, well, what's a healthy lifestyle? What does it entail? Everybody will always say, not that they do it, but they'll always say, oh, you got to eat right. People will say you have to exercise. People will say you have to have a good attitude. You got to sleep. You got to relax. Nobody will ever talk about having optimal nerve function, the nervous system communicating with the body part optimally. And so that's where we came up with the concept of DREAM for diet, relaxation, exercise, being an adjustment, and mental wellness. And so that's what we talk about, are the 5 facets or 5 keys to a wellness lifestyle. So while I was in chiropractic school, I'm developing all these ideas with my buddy Greg Barron, who was also a fraternity pledge brother of mine. So he was with me in college, and then he met me in chiropractic school after that. And just waiting for the right opportunity. Eventually, we turned our first chiropractic office into a Dream Wellness Center on Long Island in Great Neck.
So he went to the same school that you did at the same time?
He did. So we graduated. I got out of college a year early because I was able to do something where I got all my credits and everything. So he had one more year of college, and then he went to law school because he thought he was going to be a lawyer. And while he was in law school, he was not liking law school, but he was loving everything I was telling him about chiropractic. He's like, the heck with this, I'm leaving. And he went to go be a chiropractor. So then he met up with me. He was 2 years behind me in chiropractic school. But we were on board with the whole dream thing from the very beginning, and opened up the first Dream Wellness Center when he graduated on Long Island in Smithtown.
But not in Great Neck.
So then when the lease was up in Great Neck, we moved into a health club and then turned that chiropractic office into a wellness center as well. So we had two Dream Wellness Centers on Long Island. So Great Neck and Smithtown.
Now, where did you first encounter the word wellness, if you remember?
So I don't remember the first time I first encountered it, but I want to say it was somewhere early in chiropractic school, at least understanding what wellness really was, not just hearing the word wellness. But Patrick Gentempo, a chiropractor, is a mentor of mine. He used to talk about, wellness paradigms and wellness lifestyles. And it really started shifting things for me, because one of the things that I learned in chiropractic school was that we're getting to the cause of the problem. We're not treating symptoms.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that, because we are getting to the cause of a lot of health conditions, but we never really talk too much about the cause of what chiropractors fix, subluxations. So there's a cause to the cause. And so that would be the inability to adapt to stressors in life, chemical, physical, and emotional stressors. And so we just didn't delve enough into that in chiropractic school. And I just found that a lot of chiropractors were helping a lot of people avoid health conditions or medical conditions by adjusting them early on and helping the nervous system work better. But if you could really get to the cause of the subluxation in the first place, you'd be doing the person even a greater service. And in fact, one of Patrick Gentempo's former partners with Chiropractic Leadership Alliance, Chris Kent, I think it was, who said the real goal of the chiropractor should be to make his or her profession obsolete. Meaning, nobody should need to get adjusted. In the absence of a trauma, you should be living a lifestyle so strongly in wellness of doing things, and what I talk about, the DREM, right? What I always say is, when you have a strong DREM, you should stay in adjustment, which is being in balance mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, and having optimal brain-body communication to the nervous system. Because what causes us to go out of adjustment, or in chiropractic terms, to subluxate, what causes that is the inability to adapt to a stressor, a chemical, physical, and emotional stressors. So the dream lifestyle that I teach is what helps people avoid or neutralize chemical, physical, and emotional stressors, so that you don't end up subluxated. And when you don't end up subluxated and stressed out in the nervous system, you don't end up with all these other disease processes.
So now, what's the step between the stressor and the mechanical aberration of subluxation? Is it internal muscle imbalances, or in some cases it would be physical trauma, like I fell on my sacrum back in 1975, and my low back's never been the same since, despite countless chiropractic visits. But what are the other, besides physical trauma? What's the mechanism?
Yeah, so the physical stress is the obvious one, like you presented. So chemical stressors, you could lead to dehydration. It could affect the muscles. It could affect nerve tension, and basically cause the vertebrae to actually misalign. And emotional stressors, and I'm going to link the emotional and the chemical together in a second. But emotional could be obvious. People ride their shoulders up when they're stressed. Their muscles tighten up, and they get stressed in their back and everything else, where they hold the emotional stress. But the way that I like to look at stress is, and I don't look at stress as a negative thing. It's all about how the body's adapting to it, because we need stress. It's the inability to adapt to stress that causes the disease. So I look at things like an electrical panel, right? So if you put too much electricity, like you're doing the hair dryer and you're cooking something from the same outlet, you're certainly going to blow out the circuit, right? That circuit blowing out is actually a defense mechanism to prevent a fire. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
But the problem is, if that circuit is connected to the refrigerator, the food in the fridge is going to rot.
Mhm.
So we need to reset it. So we look at the spine and the nervous system in a similar way. You've got your vertebrae, and they need to have a certain alignment, because if they're out of alignment, it could put pressure on the nerve. If there's too much stress coming into the nervous system, whether it's a chemical stress through foods that we eat, toxic, pollution that we breathe in, toxic stuff that comes in our body, pesticides, GMOs, drugs pushed or prescribed, any number of chemical stress. And then there's the emotional stresses. You've got finances, relationships, jobs, you name it. There's a million that we all know what they are. When we're bombarded with too much of the chemical, emotional, and physical stressors, our circuit blows. The spine misaligns, puts pressure ultimately on the nervous system, that tension, that stress on the nervous system. It's a good self-defense mechanism at that time to not allow something too bad to happen. But if you don't reset it, then you can end up with basically the food rotting in your refrigerator, like not
And
resetting the
now
circuit in the fridge.
the mechanism of its blowing is that interspinal muscles with too
Typically.
much tension cause a misalignment.
Yep.
Okay. The
Yep.
one stressor you didn't mention was EMFs. And as I sit here with a laptop radiating Wi-Fi through my body 10 hours a day, and I'm just decided I'm going to buy a long Ethernet cable and turn off the Wi-Fi for a good part of my day. But with the 5G issue coming up too, it's like that's a major one that most people aren't aware of.
So it's interesting because I do address EMFs, and I kind of list that because also there's thermal stressors as well. You can talk about thermal stress. I kind of list those under chemical because they're all under like your science, right? Your chemistry, because you wouldn't have EMFs without chemistry. So
Yeah.
with fuses and everything else. So I list that all under chemical stressors. When I talk about toxins, that's part of pollution. EMFs are part of air pollution as far as I'm concerned. You may not breathe it in, but your body takes it in.
And it apparently affects the calcium channel pathways.
Yep.
Well, good. You've filled me in on the mechanisms of that. So let's see, you have got 2 centers going in New York.
Right.
And now you're in San Diego. So let's find out what happened. And what's your wife's name?
Her name is Brooke.
Brooke. Okay. And where did she come on the scene? And then we'll get to your son as well. But are there any other pieces in New York that we need to?
So I was married in New York with a gal that I met in college, in freshman year of college. We were together for 15 years. 5 years before we split up is when we got married. So after 10 years, great gal, still friends with her today. We just weren't a perfect fit. And I remember when we went for therapy, for marriage counseling. It was very apparent. Like the marriage therapist said, I don't normally do this, but I have to say that Brian needs to meet his June Carter. And it was when the movie Walk the Line came out, about Johnny Cash and about how Johnny Cash was so passionate about, music and that whole lifestyle. And I was doing all this speaking, in chiropractic. I was so passionate about it. And it just wasn't part of my ex's wife, my ex-wife's life. She wasn't passionate about it. And so, that therapist said, Brian needs to meet his June Carter. And
now I don't know the movie. I know the song, and I'm. But who's June Carter for me and future viewers that may not be as tuned in?
So June Carter, her character was portrayed by Reese Witherspoon, and that was Johnny Cash's wife, who was the perfect complement to him, and at least for a period of time, and they were just so in sync, and that's I knew that my June Carter was not there in New York. And so I decided, I actually had spoken out in Australia to a group of chiropractors, the World Chiropractic Alliance of Australia. I spoke out there in Melbourne and thought about moving out there, but I was also doing a lot of...
And you know how to pronounce it too. That's what's impressive.
Yeah, well, they made sure I knew when I was in Melbourne that I said it correctly. They made sure. Don't you mean Melbourne? No.
And then there's Brisbane.
That's right. Right, exactly. And so I went out to San Diego to speak for a bunch of chiropractors out there. And it kind of reminded me a lot of Melbourne. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm moving out to San Diego. So that's what brought me out there, and took me a bit of time and another relationship prior to meeting Brooke. But I remember I was in my office in one of my wellness centers. So I opened up 2 offices in San Diego, one in Pacific Beach, one in Del Mar. And now I also have one in Santee. But I was in my Pacific Beach office in one of the wellness centers talking to the girl who was our personal trainer and personal trainer and nutritionist at the time. And we were just talking about dating, and she knew I was seeing a girl up in the Bay Area, chiropractor, and it just wasn't a relationship that was going to go where it needed to go. It wasn't my June Carter. I had done a vision board about 11 months earlier, and not a vision board, but like a vision paper. It was like 5 pages typed out with images of what my dream wife would be. You know, what she would look like, what she would be like, and everything about her. And I know I conjured her up. I know I created her. Brooke, I'm sorry if you ever do listen to this. I created you, baby. And you created me too. So
Yvonne and I have the same thing, that we created each other. Yeah, it took us 68 years to find each other, but we finally did.
Yep, I love it. I love it. And so you know, I'm talking to Carol, and she's asking me about, you know, why am I dating this girl up in the Bay Area if I don't feel like it's going to go anywhere. And I'm just telling her I just haven't met the person that I know. I know what she looks like. You know, I visualize her, and I just haven't met her yet. And she's like, well, why don't you go on something like eHarmony or something like that? I'm like, no, I was dating a lot of people. I was doing a lot of first dates, but I just wasn't connecting with them. She goes, well, my friend is on eHarmony and she meets a lot of great guys. I'm like, well, good for your friend. I'm like, who's your friend anyway? She's like, my friend Brooke. I'm like, great. I'm like, well, where does Brooke live? She's like, right around the corner from the office. I'm like, really? I'm like, well, how old's Brooke? She's like 31. I'm like, oh, I'm like, how tall is she? She's like 5'1". She cute? Yeah, she is cute. I'm like, well, why is she on eHarmony not hang out with me? And then Carol's like, no, telling me every reason in the world why it wouldn't work. And everything that she had told me made me more interested. Like, oh my God, from faith to the fact that she was born at home, you know, the way that she lives her life. I was just like, I need to meet this girl. And she's like, well, I don't know if she'll want to meet you, blah, blah, blah. Because of her faith and stuff like that. Brooke is raised in Christian Science. And it's interesting because I didn't really know anything about Christian Science, but I used to joke around as a chiropractor saying, I need to marry a Christian Scientist. Somebody who's totally natural, somebody who's going to not have any trouble with a home birth, somebody who's not going to want to medicate the kids as soon as they have something going on. And so I used to joke about it. And so when Carol tells me that she was raised as a Christian Scientist, I'm like, okay, I really need to meet this girl. Well, the problem is Christian Scientists don't really go out with doctors. I'm like, I'm not a real doctor. So now I reverse the real doctor thing. I'm like, I'm not a real doctor, I promise. And I talk about how I practice wellness. I go, does Brooke eat healthfully? And she goes, yeah, she actually has a really healthy diet. I go, I do health for the nervous system. It's the same thing. It's all about lifestyle. She's like, that's true. She goes, let me talk to Brooke. And so she talks to Brooke and she says, Brooke, I might have set you up on a blind date. Like, really? She goes, tell me about him. And then she mentioned that I was a chiropractor. And Brooke is like, you know, I'm not going to date a doctor. And Carol's like, yeah, but he's different. And Brooke said to her, would you date him? And she's like, yeah, I would. And Brooke's like, okay, I'll meet him. And that was it. That was it for Brooke. And to convince her at least to meet me, at least we had that. So we talked on the phone, we connected, met on our first date. We were both intrigued. By the second date, we were really intrigued. We're still on our third date. We knew on the third date that was it. We were done. The search was over. So it's amazing.
So the first date, where was it? Like coffee or a walk or?
It's funny that you asked that. I hope your viewers and listeners are into a little humor. So I was doing a wellness workshop talking about the dream lifestyle in my office. And I said, look, Brooke, I know that you're not into dating doctors and stuff like that. I said, the best way to get to know me is come to my wellness workshop, hear what I have to say about health and wellness and how I how I practice chiropractic. And afterwards, if you're interested, we could talk. If you're hungry, we could get a bite to eat, whatever it is. We won't call it a date. And she's like, okay, that sounds good. If I can make it to the wellness workshop, I will. But if not, I'll come right after because she was supposed to have a tango class, a dance class. So I finished the wellness workshop. She wasn't there. And she walks in right as I finished. And that was all planned and everything. I think that she didn't want to be in that, and that's all good. So she comes right after the wellness workshop ends, but she was so warm. She's like giving everyone at the wellness workshop a hug. She didn't even know these people. And that was something that I really wanted in a person. I wrote in my dream wife, vision board. And so everybody left. So we sat down, we were talking in the reception room in my office. We were talking about 20, 30 minutes. And I'm like, are you hungry? She's like, yeah, I could eat. I'm like, great, let's go get a bite to eat. Because the eating part was just like maybe if we're hungry or something like that, because she didn't want it to be a date. So we go to the Greek restaurant right near my office and we have a great meal, great conversation, and the bill comes. And I'm like, she didn't want it to be a date, but how do I not pay for this? I have to pay for the meal. So if she gets mad at me for paying for the meal, then it's on her. That's her problem. I pay for the meal, and we go back to my office and we talked for a while longer. Well, I find out later, months later, when we talked about this, had I not paid for that meal, we never would have had a second date. She considered that a date. I had no idea. I thought I was just being a gentleman. Apparently, I was saving my ass.
Yes.
I had no idea that we were on a date, but I just did what gentlemen should do. And that was why I did that. Our second date, we were in a restaurant. And then we went back to my office and talked some more, and probably for hours in the office. So we definitely did not run out of things to talk about. I showed her on the computer a video that I made when I did a tryout for Survivor. That show Survivor. I'm sure you know Survivor.
I know of it. I'm not big on TV, but you did a trial like it's like a tryout to see if you can.
Yeah, basically it's kind of like an audition type tape.
Audition, that was the
an audition type video that I'd put together. And I actually gotten a call back and got pretty close to getting on it. But it wasn't meant to be for various reasons. It was in Africa, and I kind of prayed about it, and I'm like, the one place that I didn't want to go to for certain reasons would be Africa. It was, and they turned, and I'm God. I'm like, put me on Survivor as long as it's anywhere but Africa. All of a sudden, I stopped getting callbacks, and I see the commercial Survivor Africa. First time they ever went to Africa, so it wasn't meant to be. I'd love to go to Africa sometime, but they have to change certain things first. But
so your second date, where you're at the office talking, I won't ask you when you got to your bedroom, but
that was much later.
Okay. So you're still on your third date. I love that.
So yeah, so we have our third date where it was originally just going to be dinner, and it was on a Saturday, and I said to her, I'm like, you know what? Maybe we'll go to the beach and do a couple things. Why don't we start a little earlier? Why don't we hang out at start 3 o'clock? And she was like, okay, whatever. And then I texted her and I'm like, why don't we start even earlier? Why don't you come over at like 11? She's like, sure, I'm yours all day. Whatever you want. And so we spent the day together. But it's interesting because that third date almost didn't happen. Because in between the second and the third date, my brother got married in LA. He lives in New York, but his wife and the family were from LA. So the wedding was in LA. So I was in LA for the weekend and my family was there. And so, I'm sorry, it was our second date that almost didn't happen. So our second date was supposed to be on a Monday. And my father was, and stepmom and everybody was staying an extra couple of days in Southern California, and they're like, have dinner with us on Monday night. And I said, I can't, I have a date. Like, you have a date? Who's this girl you dating? I said, it's just a second date, but whatever. Like, well, cancel it, postpone it. I'm like, no, I don't do that. Like, we're in from 3,000 miles away. You're not going to cancel a second date? Like, you're going to marry this girl? I'm like, I have no idea, but I can tell you if I cancel it, I probably won't. And so they're like, all right, fine, go on that date. So we had that second date. And later I find out, had I canceled that, she would not have given me a third date because she'd been canceled on before with second dates. So everything happens the way it's supposed to. So the third date, we started early in the day and just went on. And like I said, we're still on that third date. And, we had such a great day, went to the beach in Del Mar, had some good food, sat in a hot tub over at a nice hotel, overlooking the ocean, kind of sneak into the hot tub area and stuff like that.
You too. I've learned how to do that in a couple of places.
Yeah, phenomenal. So we had a great date. And like I said, we're still on that date today. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
And when was that?
That's a great question. What year was it? It was in that 9.5 years ago. I'm trying to remember. I know it was August. It was in August of 20. My wife and my brother would kill me not knowing when his wedding anniversary is. I think about 9.5 years ago. So we'll go with that. Whatever the year. I'm bad with the years. But 9.5 years ago.
I met Yvonne 9.5 years ago exactly. So
Interesting.
I know the time period must have been something in our stars.
Indeed.
So the third date then picked up in intensity, and you. When did you wind up? Living together, getting married, whatever.
Yeah, so we got engaged. It was interesting timing actually, because I was I was giving her a hard time about when I was going to propose to her for various reasons and stuff because I didn't want to let on what I was going to do. But I think I proposed to her after 10 months of dating, which was kind of risky because I was married before, I was engaged before. So it's like, wait, am I jumping into this one too soon? But she checked
Mhm.
every single box in my vision board thing. So I knew that this was it.
Yeah.
And on top of that, we also did personal development stuff together, something called the ULT, which I share in my book. We could talk about that if you want to go there or just save that for another conversation.
What's that stand for?
It's the ultimate life tool. And
And
so it's
yeah.
actually, because you're asking about relationship, it's actually pretty pertinent to the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was engaged to the girl between my wife and Brooke, and things were slipping, one of my friends introduced me to a woman named Dr. Zana Hackett, who developed, she's a PhD, she developed this technology. It's called the Ultimate Life Tool. And it's basically like an 85 question assessment that gives information about how you show up into this world innately, what drives and motivates you,
Mm-hmm.
how you learn and download information, how you perceive life, your tolerance towards people, places, and things, how much energy you have, all this stuff. So the girl I was with and I took the test, and we sat down with Xana and did a 2-hour discovery session with her, what they call a portal. And it totally nailed me. Like it was everything about me that I couldn't even express. If you said, Brian, tell me about yourself, I couldn't even tell you these things, but they were all correct. And
Mm-hmm.
with her, it was right on. And she gave us tools that she said, if you're going to try to work out the relationship, these are the things that you need to do to make it work. And we get in the car. And so I asked her, I said, what did you think about that? And she goes, well, that was amazing. Totally nailed us. I said, what did you think about the tools that she gave us? She goes, yeah, I think as soon as you start implementing some of those, maybe I'll start implementing some. And I'm
Uh,
like, okay. I'm like, okay. So this is not going to work. And I took a vow at that moment that I will never get into a serious relationship with somebody without them taking that assessment first.
mm-hmm.
So that other girl and I split. I meet Brooke, and by the way, I'm still friends with that girl today, the ex fiance and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So I don't have bad relationships. We don't have bad
Mm-hmm.
breakups, but we just weren't right for each other. So it was probably somewhere between the third date and the ninth or 10th date. I said to Brooke, I go, listen, I could see that things are getting pretty serious here. She invited me to go to Colorado that November to spend Thanksgiving with her family. So you're talking the end of August to November. And she was inviting me. It was in October at this point. So it's like 2 months we're dating. And I'm like, I just need you to take this one little assessment first, this little personality type test
Ah.
before I get any more serious. She goes, okay. And I'm like, wow, because I know a lot of people are resistant to things like that. And she's like, if there's something I need to know about you, I want to know about it now anyway. So I'm like, great attitude. I love it. So we take it, we sit down with Xana. And before we even walked in, Xana knew that we were going to be a perfect match. She just knew the way that we would complement each other so perfectly that our opportunity, our chances of having a synchronous relationship would be so much easier than so many other couples. Pretty
Mm-hmm.
much any two people can make it work, but how much struggle is it going to take to make
Yeah.
that happen?
Yeah.
And the more you know this information beforehand, the better it is, because
Yeah.
we have been feeding each other through our entire relationship using that information where we have never actually had a bad day together. We've never had a
Mm.
fight, which is rare for me being from New York. That's what we do. We fight. Uh, and we've never had a fight. Like we've bickered like for a second. We've never gone to bed angry at each other ever in all these years. And probably about 3 years or 4 years after us doing it, we were doing goal setting, and Brooke, she was talking about wanting to eventually, do some type of relationship coaching and relationship counseling and stuff. I go, you want to be like a marriage and family therapist? She goes, no, I want to do what Xana does. I'm like, well, she does certifications. So I called up Xana and I said, Brooke wants to go through your certification program. She goes, okay, I'll take her on as a student if you do it also. So I'm like, all right, I don't want to be a coach, but I want to learn the technology. She's like, great, that's all I want. So I've been very involved with the technology. I'm actually on the board for the organization. And Brooke is a trainer. So she's gone certifications above me where she could actually train people in that technology. So
Fascinating. I want to
yeah,
check it out.
so it's really interesting. And when you do read my book, you'll get to read about it because I do include a lot of it because there's so much in our lifestyle, especially when you talk about emotional stressors, so much of it, pertains to understanding oneself and then understanding those people that you spend your time with.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So you've done that, and how long did it take before you were under the same roof?
So we got engaged after 10 months and we started the transition of moving in before we got married. I think we got married probably another 10 months after that. So we moved in somewhere between that. Her mom wasn't too thrilled about it. Her dad didn't say anything. But we were living together. I think it was probably about 5 or 6 months just because of convenience and everything else, timing wise and all that. It just made sense. And we were spending every day and every night together anyway. So we were together and I guess it was probably 5 months. We could ask her, but yeah, it sounds about right.
So now the difference in your religious backgrounds, how did that come sort out?
So interestingly, I've done a lot of exploration when it comes to faith, over the years. Born and raised in a Jewish conservative family on Long Island. Never really had a relationship with God, other than doing the stuff that I was told to do as a kid, doing bar mitzvah and everything else, all the traditions, do the holidays, the Passover, the Yom Kippur, the Seders, just everything, all the Jewish traditions, but not a real relationship with God. And when I moved out to San Diego, really engaged with a lot of friends who are Christians and stuff. I spent some time going to church with them, and really understanding God in a different way. And so building my own relationship with God, still considering myself to be very Jewish, if not more Jewish, but understanding God and what Christ signifies in a very different way than what the average Jewish person would expose themselves to. Because when I grew up going to Hebrew school, Jesus is this thing, you can't talk about Jesus, but we have so much that we can learn from him. And, the whole messianic principles in Judaism is where, the Judeo-Christian whole thing, everything comes from. So with Brooke, her faith is, that of a Christ consciousness in a way that is in healing, because Christian Science is not exactly the same as just regular Christianity. It's kind of like Christianity to me on steroids, in the sense of that they don't rely on medicine and doctors for healing. They rely on prayer, that everything is spiritual. And so I kind of see Christian Science more as a philosophical construct than anything else. So a way of practicing one's life. It's a lifestyle, and it really syncs up with chiropractic so well, because I don't remember the last time I took a prescription medication. I don't drugs are not part of my life. Maybe in a life or death situation, maybe it would show up, but it hasn't, thank God. Hasn't for our almost 5-year-old son, hasn't for my wife for all the time that we've been together. She hasn't needed any medications. So our faiths are very, very similar. I just don't tie it to a particular name or a denomination. We believe in God. We believe in spirit. We believe in a Christ consciousness. We believe that we're created perfectly in his image.
It sounds that vitalism is the common term there. I jokingly came up with that I'm a pantheistic pagan agnostic. I got all the bases covered that way.
You're pretty safe there. You got it covered.
Yeah. So you're together now, and you're married, and you've got 3 offices at this point, and
yep, 3 offices here in San Diego.
You've got different chiropractors working for you, with you, or how?
Yeah, so over the years, I've had different chiropractors in different locations. Right now, my Del Mar and Santee locations are pretty much part-time. I bounce back and forth between the two. I have a partner in the Pacific Beach location, and we'll be doing a lot of restructuring and changing the whole aspect of the practices and figuring out what we're going to do from there. Right now, I'm going to really be focusing on my book, and then creating an online course so people can really be able to dial into this wellness lifestyle and not become victims of this COVID-19 pandemic that we're living through right now as you're doing this interview in 2020.
Yeah.
Because we know that what 99.96% of the people that get COVID survive,
Yeah.
and the 0.04% of the people that die typically had a comorbidity. And
Yeah.
60% of Americans have at least one, chronic disease like obesity, high blood pressure,
Yeah.
diabetes. And so a wellness lifestyle can certainly help avoid many of those people that have it. Not all of them, but it's about putting the odds in your favor.
It's really pointed out the pathetic condition of our health. So, as a nation, and the same here in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's get to the issue of your son, and the my eyes keep drawing to him in utero there, and the happy look on her face, and then him in the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Tell me how he came about to be, and I assume was a planned child, and
Yeah, it was kind of man meets woman. Man does what he needs to do to make a baby. We don't need to go into all the details there.
I think we figured that one out.
You can figure that part out.
Yeah.
It was a very, very, very beautiful and natural pregnancy. We did a Bradley birth class. She did her typical, Brooke always eats healthfully. So she always
Mm-hmm.
eats healthy anyway, and exercise and live the dream lifestyle. We chose not to do ultrasounds throughout the process. There's actually a very interesting situation that happened I could share, because we decided to do a home birth.
Mm-hmm.
And because we didn't do any ultrasounds during the pregnancy, there was an interesting phenomenon that occurred during the birth process. So after he's born, and I caught him, which was really cool. We had the midwife and the doula there and
Mm-hmm.
everything else. And the cord was wrapped around the neck several times. So fortunately, his dad's a chiropractor. So as I'm taking him out, I'm adjusting him right away, and I hand him over to Brooke. The cord's still connected and everything else, and being fed that way. And then I noticed the midwife and the doulas taking pictures of the placenta. And I'm like, what's going on there? I'm like, why are you taking pictures of the placenta? Is this a common thing that you do? They're like, no, this is something that we have not seen. What apparently it was I think it's called a volatile cord, where the cord is not inserted into the placenta membrane where it normally would be. And so what would happen is normally there are no symptoms for it. Normally it would be picked up on an ultrasound. And when they pick up on it, very often they do a C-section because they don't want to risk a full term, something rupturing. The baby could have fatal consequences. The mom could have a fatal consequence. It's a bad situation if it goes poorly. So we didn't know about it, and we didn't do the C-section a couple days or weeks before he was born, thank goodness, because he was born right at 41 weeks or so, and he was only 6 pounds then. I'm short. My wife is even shorter. So it's like, this was not a big kid. Who knows what his destiny would have been had we done that? And it brings up a really interesting thing about vitalism and about faith in what the body is capable of. I adjusted Brooke throughout her entire pregnancy. I did a technique called Webster technique to make sure that we avoid something called intrauterine constraint. It helps avoid like breech pregnancies and stuff like that. And one of the comments that the midwife made was, from the time that she could feel where the baby was, head down, baby never moved from that spot. And the danger is with volatile cord is if the baby moves around too much, it can be a problem. So meanwhile, I'm doing all these techniques that I would normally do on anybody, not even knowing that there was a potential issue, a life-saving situation. But Zion's innate intelligence knew exactly where he needed to be. And we trusted that God that everything was going to work exactly the way that it should. And so, Brooke and I talked about our birth plan way in advance. Are we going to do ultrasounds? Are we going to do this test? Are we going to do that test? And we come to the conclusion that when you if you don't follow your faith, if you don't follow your beliefs, your paradigm in life, and something goes wrong, how do you live with that? Like, if we followed our faith and something went wrong, that would be very difficult to live with. But if you go against your beliefs, if you go against your paradigm, you go against your philosophy, and something goes wrong, I couldn't live with that. There's no way I would be able to, because, I would know in every inch of my being, my innate, my gut, everything said, we're going to do this as naturally as possible. They did this for thousands of years without ultrasound, without all these different tests. We
Mhm.
could do it one more time. Not that big of a deal. And so some people would look at that situation as being very irresponsible, and others would say it was being very dedicated and very innately driven. And I go with the latter.
Now, my friend Sarah Buckley, who I've interviewed, has written stuff I saw ages ago about ultrasound, and I don't remember the specifics. I know that they're very sensitive to it, but what led you to avoid that? What was your background and
Enough doubt.
information?
Enough doubt. You
Hmm.
know, I hear different things about it. Could lead to hearing issues. It could lead to, you know, the bombardment of cells and all this other stuff. It just did not seem for me like it was in alignment with our life. We wanted to have
Hmm.
as few interventions as possible. Do I
Yeah.
think it's a bad idea for everyone to get an ultrasound? No. I think that there's, you know, people have to have their own risk tolerance. Just like people
Hmm.
asking about the COVID vaccine. You have to have your own risk tolerance. You got to weigh the pros and the cons. For some people, even for us, if we were in a different situation, if she was older, if she had something, you know, one of the things that the midwife, she was a little concerned. The midwife was okay not doing ultrasounds, but she said, if I pick up on certain things, would you then do an ultrasound? I said, yes.
Hmm.
If there was a reason to do it, we would do it. But
Hmm.
there was no reason. She was extremely healthy by every parameter that we could measure somebody's health. And there was just no reason to do it and to believe that this was not going to be handled the way that it needed to be handled.
And now getting home births in California is getting harder and harder. How did you manage that?
Actually, that was not an issue at all.
Mm.
As long as, you know, the birth is done within a certain period of time, the mother is not a certain level of risk or whatever it is, wasn't too bad for us.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Because the interviewing the midwives, it's getting harder and harder for many of them, and a lot of the doctors who used to cover them have lost their insurance, and it's a real war against home birth.
Yep.
Despite the fact that it's been shown to be safer than hospital births, unless you have a high risk condition. So
Yep.
interesting. So his name is Zion, I gather,
Yes.
and
Yep.
he's now 5.
He'll be 5 in a month.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
And drug free, and
Yep. Yep. Never had to take any medication in his life, not one time.
yeah, same with my daughter, who was born at home. The first
Amazing.
daughter was different. Well, it was a short delivery and labor in a hospital, but I got to be present and no drugs. So, what, as we're wrapping up here, what sort of things historically might I've missed along the way, significant events that have shaped your path?
Oh my gosh, I feel like this was kind of the colonoscopy of my life. I don't think you missed a whole lot.
Well, good.
Yeah, I think that we covered a lot more than I thought we would cover, and I hope that your viewers and listeners weren't bored and they're somewhat intrigued and
No,
maybe even entertained.
no, this is typical of, and I'm going to have to use that term, a colonoscopy, if you're like
Yeah,
less painful, I hope, and
yeah, I've
without
never had one, so
drugs.
I don't know, but
Me
yeah,
neither, and I'm not getting one.
ditto.
In Australia, they don't do them routinely. They only if you have they send out free called blood stool analyses, and that's
Interesting.
how you decide whether
Sounds like a pretty safe bet. And for you viewers out there, we're not giving medical advice saying don't get colonoscopies.
Good point. Good point. If you want to,
That's
but
right.
there's a lot of other things to do first. So, any parting words of wisdom for our viewers before we end the recording and
I
pump
think
you with some
that,
more questions?
yeah, I think that parting words of wisdom, I would just say that for one, you know, don't blame the woes in life on bad luck, bad germs, and bad genes. Look at the choices that you're making in life. We have so much more control. I think they say like maybe 20% of mortality is really based on genetic material. You have epigenetics. There's so many different things that you can change just based on lifestyle. Doesn't make any guarantees, but it puts the odds in your favor. So I always tell people, live your dream every day. You know, make sure your conscious diet is everything that goes into your body from the outside world to the inside world. It's everything you eat, drink, taste, touch, smell, feel, hear. All the movies you watch, all the people you spend time with is just as much part of your diet as the food you consume. Don't spend time gossiping with people. Don't watch all the news all the time and murder stories and blood, gore, and everything else. Just that's garbage, garbage in, garbage out. Remember that old
Yeah.
term, Term Gigo. Relaxation, for the R is giving your body a chance to call time out, to reset, repair, regenerate, and rejuvenate yourself. Take care of yourself. Make sure you get enough sleep, meditate, pray, whatever it is that you've got to do to really reset yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Exercise, any activity that requires physical or mental exertion. So not only working out in the gym or getting outdoors and doing some activity, do some crossword puzzles, read stimulating books and magazines, learn some new things every day, keep your body sharp, your brain sharp. I said, being an adjustment is being in balance mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, and having optimal brain-body communication to the nervous system. And then M for mental wellness is connecting your inner purpose and passion to your outer goals and tasks in all phases of life, being right with your self-esteem, self-worth, self-value, so on and so forth. So live that dream lifestyle. One of these days you could pick up my book. Hopefully it'll be out in February or March of 2021. Don't know the exact title of it yet. It might be Choice versus Chance, the keys to raising healthy kids naturally. It might be Dream Wellness, the 5 keys to raising kids with a lifetime of physical and mental health. You could just find it by my name on Amazon, I'm sure. Just look up Brian Stenzler.
There'll be a
sure
link to your website with the narrative
Perfect.
that gets
Perfect.
them here, so they can follow it that way.
Great.
Well, this has been delightful to get to know you this way, Brian, and even if it was on the end of a colonoscope, but no.
It was wonderful.
Thank you so much. I'm going to end the recording now.
Thank you so much, Jack.